All right, we're looking at here is a 2008 Ford Escape. I'm getting ready to take it back to the shop. What's going on is it won't shift out of first gear until about 35. See right there, it kind of jerks. We're still in first gear. Still won't shift. That was almost 4,000 RPM. So I don't even know if I got long enough runway here. I think it just there shifted at about 4,500 in the second. Yeah, so it's in second now, but you can see it took it to about 4,000, 4,500 before it shifted. There it went into third, about 3,000 RPM. So what's going on here? This is pretty common on these. The transmission assembly band, I'm assuming is broke inside the transmission, and you can change these without pulling the transmission out. So I'm going to take it back to the shop, and we will take it apart and see. I got a feeling we're going to find a broken band in there, and then I've already ordered the parts from Ford, and I'll show you how to replace that and fix this problem. So I'm going to get it back in the shop and get it jacked up on the driver's side, and then we'll pick back up. All right, so this is take the wheel off, and then you're going to have, this is where you're trying to get to right here. This big cover will be covering it up. A whole bunch of 10 millimeter bolts that hold that in. Take all that off, remove this cover, get it out of the way. Now, you need to get to this and pull this pump off here, but you're not going to be able to do it with the, this thing's really rusty. You won't be able to do it with it up, because there's a bunch of bolts up in here. And even if you could get those out and open in, you wouldn't be able to pull this pump out far enough. So what we have to do is remove this axle first, and then we'll start removing the mounts for the transmission, and that'll bring this transmission down far enough past this wheel well here to where we can take it off. So first things first, we'll go ahead and pull this axle out and remove it, and that'll allow, because if you don't remove it, the transmission will get caught, the axle will get caught on the frame over here, and the transmission won't come down far enough. So we'll move this axle here first and go from there on. We'll have to go to the top, remove the battery and air box, a bunch of crap, but we'll start with the axle first, get it out of the way. So I'm going to remove the brakes first and hang those out of the way, and then we'll start taking the axle out, removing the steering knuckle and all that good stuff. Alright, first thing you want to do, I already got the caliper out of the way. Go ahead and tie that up off the strut, and then get a 32 millimeter axle socket, and we'll run this axle nut off. And hopefully it's not seized. I usually like to put the nut back on and kind of tap on it, make sure it's not seized into the hub before I go much farther. And this one's pretty tight in there. Yep. So this one's pretty, not moving much, so I might have to get the hub puller out. So the next thing we're going to do is take off the strut from the steering knuckle here. Two 19 millimeter bolts and nuts. I'll get that set up real quick. Alright, the other thing I did off camera was take off this ABS or speed sensor. Get that loose off of the strut. You don't want to pull on this too hard. This is pretty rusty under here, so I'm not going to try to pull it out from the hub. I imagine it'd be seized in there if I tried that. So I'm just going to give enough slack here to do its thing. And if I have to, I can take the bracket off up here on the wheel well too. We'll try it like this first. So get a 19 open end, a 19 socket, and we'll go ahead and run these strut bolts out so that we can move the strut away from or knuckle away from the axle. That's one of them. I was surprised how this thing's pretty rusty. Kind of surprised for 2008. I mean, it's not that weird, I guess, in St. Louis. We do get quite a bit of rust up here. So go ahead and tap these out. Put the nut back on so you don't ruin the bolt. Tap those out, and then I got a feeling I'm going to have to get my hub puller, stick on here and pull this axle out. It's pretty rusted in there. So anyway, I'm going to dry these out, and that'll release this knuckle from the strut. And then once we get the axle loose inside the hub, we should be able to get behind it on the transmission side and pull it out. Alright, so this axle is pretty rusted in this hub. This is what I use to remove this. Normally you shouldn't have to do this. These axles, you should just be able to hit them a couple times and they'll get out. But this thing's got real heavy rust all over this. I'm hoping that pump comes out. Anyway, this is, you just bolt this to your lug nuts. And then it's got a bolt that goes through the center and it pushes the axle out. So it's out now. Last time I had to do this though, the axle was so messed up that I had to replace it. But this one, I'm just going to soak it down. Hopefully it's still good, and we'll move on from there. So now I'm just going to take this off, and then I'll pull this out enough to get that axle out of here. And then we'll get under it with a pickle fork and a hammer and just pop it out. Should pop right out. And then we'll move on to the top. I want to get the top stuff off so that I can get to that main, there's a main motor mount up there, transmission mount, and that's the last one I'm going to take out. But I got to be able to get to it once I get the other two out. So, yeah, I'm going to pull this axle out and then we'll go up to the top. Alright, so I kind of cheated on this. Usually I use a pickle fork to get these out, but with this one it was pretty tight in there. So I use this, this is from OTC. It's an axle puller, axle attachment for your slide hammer. And it's mainly for a lot of Fords, especially on the driver's side. So this is what I use to get in there and just pop that axle out. It's right there. So if you don't have that and you can't get anything up there, I probably could have got a pry bar or something up there. I like using pickle forks. And I just couldn't get one up there with the angle and the way the frame is. So I have this, so I just got this out. If you don't have this and can't get it out, I believe the auto parts stores do rent these out. So you should be able to find one of these and rent it out. And then once you take it back, they give you your money back. So anyway, now I'm going to get up top, take the air box out and the battery, and get it cleared to where I can get to that top mount. And then I'm going to get underneath here, and we got two mounts under here and a couple of braces we got to take out. And then I'm going to check the motor mount on the other side and make sure it's good. As long as that's good, I'll put a piece of board or something under the transmission and lower it down after I take that top mount out. If not, I have an engine brace I can put up there that you use to take transmissions out. But I got a feeling we won't need that. So anyway, getting a little ahead of myself. Let's go ahead and take the battery out and the air box and stuff and get to that top mount. And then the rest of it will be kind of underneath here. Alright, I got the battery and air box out. The battery, just pull the terminals off, and you have 4 8mm bolts that go into the tray. Remove those out, take it out, and then you have one 10mm for the air box over here. And of course you got the throttle body connection, flathead, and that stakes out. I figure if you are going to tackle this job, you probably know how to take a battery out and an air box, but that's the rundown on it. And what you're trying to get to is this mount right here. So I'm going to leave this in right now. This is the last one I'm going to take out. So now we're going to move to the bottom, take out a couple braces, a couple mounts down there, and then we'll jack it up a little bit, take some pressure off it, and remove this bolt. And then that should allow it, with the axle out, should allow that transmission to come down far enough to where we can work on it. So yeah, remove your battery, your box, and get access to that, and then we'll move underneath and start getting those out. Alright, once you're under here, you want to take, I usually take this front brace off. It goes across from the driver's side to the passenger side. Remember, you're going to pull this whole transmission down, so this brace here will get caught on this brace if you don't remove it. So I believe it's 4 15mm bolts So we'll go ahead and remove those. Man, incredible amount of rust on this thing. See how rusty that bolt is. So we'll get the other two down by the passenger side real quick. Sorry about that compressor. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this last one out. Man, this one is rusty. Alright, so now you got that pulled off. Go ahead and set this off to the side. I'm going to go ahead and stop the camera until the compressor goes off. I know how annoying that is. Alright, so that compressor took forever to shut off. Sorry about that, but so I went ahead and took this brace off. This is the one that goes from the front by the radiator to the back of the car. And all it is, you have one 15mm that goes inside the transmission to this one here. And then you have two 15mm in the front that hold the brace, and then you have one big 21mm nut in the back. And this is not, it looks heavy, but it's really not that heavy. It's very light, so just as long as you have an arm on it to catch it, you should be fine. Some of these can be pretty heavy, but this one's not too bad. So just leave one in the front. What I usually do is leave one in the front unthreaded almost all the way. Take the other one in the front out, take the one in the back completely out, and then I just grab it with my arm and take the one that I had loose off the rest of the way, and should be no problem. So now we got one mount in the back that we have to get to, and then the only thing holding this transmission up will be the top mount, and we'll put a jack and some wood underneath it to support it, and we'll take that out, and then we should be able to lower it enough to get where we need to get to fix this band. So I'm going to look at the back, see what I need for the back mount, what size, and get it ready to go, and then we'll pick back up. Alright, so this is the last mount underneath. We're actually underneath the transmission, in between the firewall and the transmission. So you just take this out, 15mm. And this will be the last mount under here that we have to get out. The transmission is pretty loose now. So the only thing holding the transmission itself up is that mount on the top we took out by the battery. So now we'll just place a brick or a board under this transmission with the jack, support it. We'll take out that top mount. We'll take out that top mount, and then we should be able to lower it down, or we can work on the transmission itself. Alright, I got a transmission underneath I have a jack under the transmission. So I'm going to take this last 15mm bolt for this mount out. And that will be it. This transmission should drop down far enough to work on it. Right now that bolt's kind of seized in there because the transmission dropped, so I'll have to jack it up just a hair to pull that bolt the rest of the way out, and then we'll go out and look what we got with the pump in the front. Alright, so you can see it's dropped down quite a bit. There's one bolt you can't see right here at the edge, but it will be enough to pull this pump out. So, man, this thing. First thing I'm going to do is take this sensor off. Looks like an 8mm, and then we'll take off this Torx here for the trans line. Take that off, and then I'm going to go around and take most of these bolts out around the pump. I'm gonna leave a few in though, because you don't want, there's a the inside transmission, this is pressed up against it. You don't want that falling out. If that falls out, you got to pull the whole transmission out and basically do a rebuild on it. So normally what you do is you take this sensor out, break this loose, put a screwdriver in there to kind of hold it while you're using a slide hammer to pull it out. And the bolts that you use to use the slide hammer look like they're rusted really bad. So that kind of sucks. Hopefully, man. Normally, see, there's a hole right here that's threaded, and then you use this hole here, and you hook up a three-way jaw to it, and then a slide hammer and pop this out. But this thing is so rusty, I don't know. Well, anyway, we're gonna remove this, get this sensor out, remove this, and then we'll start taking these bolts out, and we'll see what happens with it. Hopefully, I can get it out with that thing being so rusty. One thing you will want to do once you start taking these perimeter bolts out on this pump is to put a pan under there, because you'll start losing fluid once it starts to break loose. There's a small seal on there, like a rubber band type seal, and once that starts to break loose, you'll start losing fluid. Hopefully this thing's not, man, everything's just so rusty on it. Got this bottom Torx here. Kind of hammer it in because there's a lot of rust in the hole. Take that out. All right. Now we should be able to rotate this down. Except it's rusted onto the line. Rust, rust, rust. That thing should just slide right over. It's just a rubber bushing, but so anyway, I'm not going to bore you with this. Just take all the perimeter bolts out. Like I said, I leave two of them in there, about halfway or a little more out, just in case this thing would pop out. You don't want that inside, the clutches of steel and all that stuff to slide out with it. So just for a safety precaution, I leave them in there a little bit. Two of them. Alright, so I'd already gotten this out. Like I said, I left two bolts in, one on each side, and I use a slide hammer to get these out. And normally what you do is, you know, you have the bolt down here, the hole down here that holds your transmission line to the transmission. Well, that has a bolt that goes through it, so it keeps the threads nice and clean. And then there's another hole up here at Boss with threads. Well, this one's so rusty that they were rusted out. And I tried drilling and tapping it, and it's so rusty. I just couldn't get anything to bite in there. So I ended up using the slide hammer and just screwing into this hole and pulling out. That's not ideal, obviously. You want to be able, it probably took me a good 30 minutes to get this out. Whereas if I had both these holes available to me, it probably would only took, you know, a few minutes. You know, I would slide hammer it a bunch of times, and I would kind of tap it back, make it level again, then slide hammer it, and then tap it back. Total pain in the butt. Not all of these pumps are rusty like this, but this one is, and that's what I had to deal with. So it is what it is. I got it out, and this is what the back side looks like. It's your oil pump, pump, and so anyway, I got it out, and then here's the transmission itself. This will come out with it sometimes, the long rod. Just put it back in there and make sure it locks in. And then you really don't want this you don't want this to come out under any circumstance. Now they say, tell you, anytime you turn the recorder on, you got trains coming by, or that train's pretty far away and it's still making that kind of noise. Anyway, you don't want this assembly to come out. A lot of people say, you take this sensor off, have someone hold a screwdriver against this before you start slide hammering it. I've never had one come out, and I don't think it comes out that easy anyway. But it's up to you how you want to. I didn't have anyone hold it for me. These are in there pretty solid. Now, if it does fall out, then you have to take the whole transmission out and put it back in. So that's not good. So here's the band, and you can see here's the band. It goes all the way around, and you can see right here, it's broken, and that's what causes these delayed shifts. This is supposed to be hooked to that band right there, and it's not. It's broke off. This is very common on these transmissions. It's the same as the Mazda Tribute, the Mercury Mariner, and then the Ford Escapes. So we're going to go ahead and pull this band out and take a look at it and get to replacing it. Now, I got the new band from Ford. Some people call it the inside of these bands have friction material, and you want to soak that in transmission fluid pretty good before you install it, which we will do. And you soak the inside of it. Sorry about that. This is friction material, just like any transmission band has. So make sure you get that good and wet with transmission fluid before you install it. And that should just slide out of there. I'm going to get it out real quick. But I got this one at Ford. And then I got the seal that goes around, and then there's a gasket that goes. You got that. We'll kind of go over that a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull this band out, and we'll take a look at it and get the new one in there. So this band shouldn't be too hard to get out. Just kind of slide it out of there. And there you go. And you can see this band, I don't know if you can see, but there's quite a bit of friction material left on this band. This band itself, the actual friction material is fine. It's still pretty thick. It's probably just almost as thick as the one we're replacing it with. But the problem here is it breaks off. It's supposed to go like this. And once that breaks off, this thing can't compress down on that drum. And that's where all your problems start. So, yeah, it breaks off like that. So this band, what it does is it uses fluid and it compresses down around this drum. And when it's not allowed to do that, or when it breaks and can't do that, then obviously, you don't have the compression, you got the delayed shifts and stuff. So I'm going to soak the new one for a little while, and then we'll slide that back in, and then we'll start putting this back together. On this particular car, most of the time, when you drop all those mounts out, it's down far enough. You can see on this particular car, the top is still covered by this, by the inner fender here. It's actually not really inner fender, it's inner frame. So I had to take a pry bar and just pull down the transmission just barely, just a little bit to get it to clear that. So if yours is like this, a lot of them will drop down far enough, but every car is a little bit different. Maybe the exhaust is a little different on this one, or who knows. So it won't drop down all the way on its own. Even with the jack letting go, it still won't drop down far enough. So I just took a pry bar and just pried down on it just a little bit on the top of the case here. It only took a little bit, and then it cleared it. So when I put it back together, I'll have to pry back down on that a little bit, put that in there, and then let it go. So, yeah, if you've gotten this far, you're doing good. The hardest part, I think, in this, the rest of it is just taking everything apart to get to it. But the hardest part is removing that pump. And usually it will fight you a little bit. Obviously it's ideal if you can get both your holes to screw in for a slide hammer. This one, there's just no way. It's just so rotted out that, I would spend more time. I even thought about welding maybe a stud into it to hold it, but I didn't want to waste a whole bunch of time trying to fab something up or go way out of my way and start drilling bigger holes and tapping and all that just to get this pump out. So I was able to get it out with just the one boss, and hopefully yours isn't that rusty and you'll be able to screw into it and get it out no problem. Usually that's what the case. You just screw those two in, put the slide hammer on, it comes right out. Well, it doesn't come right out. These things are actually in there pretty good regardless, but like I said, it took me probably 30 to 45 minutes to get this one out, and that's kind of abnormal. Usually you can get them out 5 minutes or so. So anyway, that's the biggest thing. And then if this will come out with your pump sometimes. Just make sure you put it back in there and it's locked back in. And if you haven't done it before, or you want to make things a little bit easier, you could mark your pump and kind of index it to where index it. It's pretty obvious how it goes, but if you haven't done a lot of transmission work or whatever, go ahead and index it so you know what holes line up where, and then makes it a little bit easier going back together. So anyway, I'm just going to soak that band and transmission fluid a little bit, and then we'll install it back in here and get this thing back on the road. Alright, so I soaked it down with some Mercuron, and it's been soaking for a little while, and it's pretty wet, so we'll go ahead and put this new band in and just basically put it in the way it came out. Make sure you have it oriented right. You really can't put it in backwards because it wouldn't fit, but just make sure you put it back in where it goes. Once you get it set in there, then we'll start to put this new gasket and seal on this pump and start putting it back together. One thing I will point out, you have this bearing here. Sometimes this will come off with your pump itself. Just make sure you put it back where it belongs. You don't want to forget that. Just set it up there, and then make sure it's there when you start to put the pump back in. And then on the bottom here, you have the plunger that goes on top of the plunger. I mean, it's just very obvious when you're doing this job to slide this above the plunger. That's what comes up and grabs it and compresses this band against the drum. So we're going to go ahead and clean up this a little bit, the case, and put a new seal in. I'll show you what I use for seals to lubricate them when I work on transmissions real quick. And then I'm just going to go ahead and put this back in and start bolting it up. Alright, so I got the old seal removed. I already put the new seal in. The new seal comes with the white stripe on the top. So I went ahead and put that in. This is from Ford, of course. And then what I use whenever I do any kind of transmission work is this blue assembly goo gel. It's for transmissions. And it won't, you don't want to use RTV or anything like that on a transmission. So I use this stuff, and I'll just run a real light bead around this seal to help it go in place and to lubricate it. And this stuff just basically, it won't hurt your transmission. It kind of after it's wherever it's at, it'll just kind of disappear and dissipate inside the transmission. So there's no issue with it. And you don't need you don't have to glob it. Pumps. Do not change this gasket on your pump unless you see it ripped or something, because if you take these bolts out here for the pump, it'll misalign everything, and then you'll end up tearing your pump up unless you have the pump alignment tools. There's a special tool for it that realigns all this stuff if you would take these nuts out or these Torx out. So my suggestion to you is, if you're just going in and changing the band and this gasket still looks okay, which it probably will be okay, I would say 90% of the time there shouldn't be anything wrong with it, so you should be fine with it. Unless you really know how to rebuild transmissions and have the special tools, I would not change this gasket. The other thing too that's a big problem on these is the outside rust on these. We've already went over that with this. You can see all the rust on it, and the rust gets up around the edges here, and then it gets up around the transmission case. So you really want to clean up around these edges, any kind of rust, and look inside your groove here and make sure there's no rust in there. Because if you have any rust in there or on the edges, especially on the transmission side, and you go to put that new seal on, you got this little rubber seal here. Now I would replace that. Don't reuse that because you'll have trouble with these leaking. These things are very prone to leak, especially if yours is rusty like this. So get the new seal. It's only like $8, $10, $12 at Ford for this to go around here. That's what seals it up to the transmission, so you don't lose transmission fluid out the back of it. But this is, in my opinion, this is a piss poor design. This here is steel, and it's right by the driver's side wheel. And all they have protecting this is a piece of plastic. The little plastic wheel cover, and you can see how badly rusted this is. And there's no way around. It's just, unless the car is in a different area. But if you're in an area that gets rain and snow and stuff, this is going to rust out. And that's why it's so hard to get out too if you're in this kind of area, because the rust gets in between this pump and the transmission and causes all kinds of havoc. So kind of losing my train of thought. But clean this up really good on the out edge. Make sure your groove is really clean, and do not, whatever you do not take these Torx bolts out, because you'll misalign the pump, and then your pump will be bad. When you go to put it back in, you'll either break that rod that goes from here to the torque converter, or you'll bust the gears inside here if it's not aligned properly. So don't do that. Just for your FYI, do not change this gasket unless it's damaged. If it is damaged, you don't have a special tool, my suggestion would be to take it to a transmission shop, have them put the gasket in, realign it, and all that. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. I'm going to take you over to the transmission real quick side and show you what I'm talking about with the case. All right, so this is the case for the transmission, and this is the groove that seal, the round seal, rides into and seats. And I don't know, depending on where you're at, I guess if you're in a dry climate or whatever, a different part of the country, you may be okay. But here in St. Louis, what happens is all the rust builds up between the pump and the seal. There's a very small space there very small space in between here, but rust still gets in here. And what happens is, if you don't clean this up really well, like this one's I already cleaned this one up. If you don't clean this up really well, and then you go to put that pump back in there, you'll put little nicks and rip your seal, and then you'll have a problem with it leaking. So if you having a problem with it leaking, that's probably what your issue is there's too much buildup around this case here. It's funny, there's not much room between the pump and the case, but just enough in there for rust and stuff to form all around this. And that's how this one's really rusty anyway, but that's how this one was. There was rust all the way around this, and if you don't clean that off, when you go to put the new pump in. All right, when you're putting this back in, put all the bolts in and run them down until they're almost flush. And then what I would do is do a crisscross pattern several times so that this thing seats level, because it has to lock into everything that's inside the transmission. You don't want to force anything, and you don't want to just tighten them down one at a time, go around, because you'll get it at a weird angle. So I crisscross several times on it, and you'll notice when you tighten them, you'll go back to the same bolt for the second pass, it'll be loose. That's because it takes a while for this thing to get sucked down in there and for it to seat properly. So take your time when you put this back together, crisscross it several times, make 3 or 4 passes, and then do one final pass all the way around and make sure they're all torque tight. Every time I turn the camera on, the train's coming by. We're not even that close to a train. We're close, we're not that close. But anyway, do that. Make sure it's nice and tight, it goes in there nice and straight. And then now I'm going to go ahead and put, now my light's out. Now I'm going to go ahead and put my transmission line mount back in and my sensor up here. and then we'll start jacking this thing up and start putting the mounts back together and getting it going. All right, so we got the sensor back in and plugged in, and I went ahead and lubed that up with transmission fluid, the seal and the inside of there to make it slide in easier. And then you got the transmission line bracket that holds it. Got that back in. So now we're going to go up top, and we're going to jack the transmission up, get that top mount lined up, start that bolt and tighten it, and then we'll put the air box and battery back in on it. All right, so you just jack your transmission up until your mount line's back up, and then run your 15 millimeter bolt back through there. And that should be good. You should be able to drop your jack out from under it now. I'm going to go ahead and put the air box and battery back in, and just button up this top part up here, because there's no reason to come back up here once we get that stuff in. And then we're just going to go and do reverse from the bottom, put the axle and the mounts and all that good stuff back in. All right, your air box really only has one bolt that holds it in, and that's up here on the top by the fender well. It's 10 millimeter bolt. And then you got your mass air sensor, and you also have your emission line, and that just has got a white tab on it. You pull it, pulls right out. And then your battery box has 4 8 millimeter bolts that go into it, and just take those out, and that battery box will pull right up. So I'm just gonna put those in, put the battery back in, and then we'll be done under the hood, and we'll go back underneath the car and finish it up. All right, so this is that vac mount between the firewall and the engine. Should have been the last one you take off when you're down here. Go ahead and tighten that one up, and then we'll get that cross member back up. All right, so I got this main cross member bolted in. You got the 21 millimeter nut in the back. You got the two 15s up front and the 15 for the actual mount. Go ahead and start that one. These are all started, so it's okay to go ahead and run this one down. All right, and then we'll go ahead and get the front here. And when you put this back up, you're going to have to start the front, get it up past this bumper here, and then put it in the back. Otherwise, you won't be able to put it straight up because the bumper's in the way. So we'll go ahead and hit these two in the front. And switch out to a 21 mil for the back. Anyway, you get the drift. I'm going to do the other one. It's kind of hard to do this one-handed, so I'll pick it back up in a second here. All right, so we got that one in the back, 21 mil, and that should be it for this big cross member. So that one's tight. Now all we have left under here, technically, is that, if you remember, we had that other cross member that went across here. And that was 15 mils. So that one just gets put back up where it went and bolted down, and then all you got left is the axle. All right, so I already put the axle in. If you took it out, you probably know how to put it back in, but when you put the axle in, make sure it's you put it straight to the transmission and it's locked in, and then go ahead and compress it with your arm, your hand, and just tap it in until you feel it. It'll actually make a different sound. It'll be more of a dull thump when it bottoms out. Once it bottoms out, you just slide it back into the knuckle. Get your two bolts tight up here. Put your axle nut on, tighten that up. Don't forget to put your speed sensor or ABS sensor bracket back on your brakes. Now, I left the shield off for right now. I'm going to start it up, make sure it's not leaking. I don't think it will. It's got all these seals in it, but I like to double check. I also want to note I only lost about maybe a half a quart to a quart of transmission fluid. Now would be a good time to go ahead and drain your transmission fluid and give it all new fluid. I didn't do it on this one because the side case here is leaking. And of course, nobody in St. Louis has a seal. I don't know. I don't know why, but they don't. So I'm going to order the seal. And then when I change that seal on this side, that's when I'll go ahead and just put all new fluid in it. For now, I'm just going to top it off. Make sure nothing's leaking that I touched. I might go ahead and try to tighten this seal up over here a little bit. Maybe it'll slow it down until I get the new one. And then we'll just bring the car back in later and fix that seal and drain the fluid out completely. But if you don't have any other leaks and you just did this job, now would be a good time to go ahead and drain it all out and refill it with new fluid. But since, like I said, since I have to pull this off later, it's just a waste of money to do that now. We can bring the car back later and take care of it. So I'm going to go ahead and start it, top it off, and then we'll take a test drive and see if it shifts any better after we get it all topped off and ready to go. All right, so I got it all back together and I'm driving it. It is shifting fine now. I'm on a pretty big incline right here, and you can watch it. This is from a dead stop. Oh, I'm spinning the tires. It's raining out here. It's a dead stop. We're still in first. Just shifted right there at 2200 to second. And that's third gear right there, 2200. Like I said, I'm going with a pretty big incline. So it's definitely fixed, confirmed fix. If you remember right, it was shifting out about 4,000 RPM. And even if you let off the fuel, it would still just hang there and jump right back up. I will, I forgot to mention, this car had two codes for it: incorrect gear ratio, second and third gear, or second and fourth gear. I don't remember exactly. I should have wrote it down or showed you, and I forgot. But this car did have two transmission codes for incorrect gear ratio. And I think they're like a PO7 something. I can't remember exactly. I've seen them before, but I can't keep all the codes in my head like that. But anyway, if your car has those codes, that's, see here, shifting about 2,200 RPM every time under a light load. So it's doing real good. So if your car has those codes and it's not shifting, you probably have a broken band. So I wanted to mention that about the check engine light. And then the other thing I want to mention is, I would say the majority of shops, if you have a Ford Escape or a Mercury Mariner or the Mazda Tribute, and yours is doing this where it shifts real late and you have those codes, the majority of shops are probably going to tell you that you need the transmission rebuilt. Now this car has 144,000 on it, and when I took that band out, you could see there was plenty of material left on that band. So in most cases, I mean, a lot of shops won't tackle transmission problems anyway if they're just a regular repair shop. The advantage I have is I can take on jobs like that, and I can do research a little bit more than like a normal shop can or something like that, and find out what's really going on with it. But anyway, I would say if you have that problem and you're shifting late and you have those codes, or even if you don't have those codes, you're shifting real late, this is a very common problem on these cars. Try to find someone that'll do that for you, that'll just change that band, because that'll save you probably a couple $1,000s. A transmission rebuild, you figure the average on this is probably about $1,800 to $2,500 depending on where you live, what the going rate is. But transmissions aren't cheap, we all know that, and even a used transmission, getting it and replacing it and doing all that would be pretty costly. This is about, I don't know, 2-3 hour job. Now, I had a little bit more trouble with this one because of that boss was rusted out. Hopefully yours don't have that if you're going to fix it yourself, or if you're going to take it somewhere. If you take it somewhere and they're not used to dealing with stuff like that, they might add on to it too. But I would have to guess that a lot of shops would want you to have the whole transmission rebuilt, and I'd put a big no on that and just tell them you want that band replaced. And if they don't know how to do it, take it to somewhere that does know how to do it and just tell me what that band replaced. Now, I've heard people call it the 1-2 band, 3-4 band. Ford calls it the band assembly. So it doesn't have any numbers on it or anything. So when you go to order, if you're going to do it yourself, just tell Ford Ford dealer what your transmission is in your car, your VIN or whatever, and tell me what the band assembly, gasket, and seal, and they'll have it for you. They'll probably have to order it, but you'll get it. So I guess that's about it. This is confirmed fix. We're doing good. Hopefully I'll get her back in a few weeks to fix that other seal that's leaking that nobody has in St. Louis, which I don't know why, but that's a whole other story with parts departments. So yeah, I'm gonna go back, check the fluid one more time, and call it a fix, ship this hoopty out, get on to the next one. I got a bunch of stuff coming up, engine swaps and some other things. I'm pretty busy for a one-man operation, so I try to make these videos when I can to help people out and help people save money or help people at least get a direction on what they need done. So you can't always film every car, but I try to film the ones I think that be the most useful to people. So I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. It helps out, gets me a wider reach, and gets me to my goal of finally being able to monetize it eventually. So if you can subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Like us on Facebook. And if you're in the St. Louis area and have an escape that has this issue, contact me on Facebook. I can set something up and we'll get you fixed up. Other than that, I guess we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.